On June 27th, I released this video where I made a multi-line renderer with just Minecraft Redstone. The end result was a screen with 12 line drawers. You could draw 12 straight lines at once by giving each line a start point and an end point. If any of what I just said didn't make sense, I highly recommend watching that video first before watching this one. It's pretty cool, you won't regret it. So, what's next? You guys made it pretty clear. A logical next step is to render a 3D object, like a wireframe cube, and rotate it. This is going to be a huge challenge, but I'm super excited for it. So without further ado, let's make a 3D wireframe renderer with just redstone. First things first, I don't want to just rotate a cube, because it would make the whole thing only do one thing. The multi-line renderer was cool because it gave you the freedom to draw whatever lines you want. So let's keep that spirit of freedom. Instead of the user choosing a bunch of lines, let's allow the user to create their own 3D wireframe. But first, what is a wireframe, and how should we define it? A wireframe is really just a bunch of points and a bunch of lines. Formally, we'll call this a vertex table and an edge table. The vertex table stores all of your vertices, or points, and the edge table lists all the pairs of vertices that are connected, or the lines. For example, let's describe a wireframe cube using a vertex table and an edge table. For the vertex table, let's list the 8 vertices that make up the cube, and I'll label these A, B, C, all the way to H. Now for the edge table, let's list the pairs of vertices that make up the lines. The front face uses AB, BC, CD, and DA, and yeah, you get the idea. Now that we know how to define a wireframe, let's build a system for the user to input one. Since we're in Redstone, everything has to be done in binary. That means everything in the vertex table and everything in the edge table has to be just zeros and ones. So for each vertex, let's have the user input 3 binary numbers, X, Y, and Z, and that'll be its 3D location in space. And then for each edge, let's have the user input 2 binary numbers, the address of the first vertex and the address of the second vertex. Let's stack these a bunch more times. I don't know exactly how many I want to do yet, but we can always change it later. Okay, here's the vertex table on the top and the edge table on the bottom. Awesome, now the user can type in all their vertices and all their edges. Since these edges are in the form of addresses, let's label those addresses above each vertex. Alright, perfect. So now if I type in 2, 3, I'm specifically referring to the vertices at 2, 3, which are right here. Now we need a system where we can input an address and output the corresponding vertex, like a decoder. But unlike a normal decoder, we need this to be dynamic. It has to change based on what vertices are inputted. I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I'll be back when I get something going. Okay, here's my attempt at something that does that. Let me show you how this works. So this part right here is just a bunch of memory, and you can tell it's memory because there's a bunch of repeater locks that hold the information in place. Now when I press this button over here, it loads the vertex table into the memory by unlocking all the repeater locks and allowing all the vertices to flow in. So let's try loading it. I'll just put 111 at address 1, and I'll put 222 at address 2. Go back here, bop. Now that it's loaded, we can use this decoder down here to read whatever address we want. So let's see what's at address 1, and it should output right over here. Yep, 111. That's the vertex we put at address 1. Let's see what's at address 2, 222. Perfect. I'm really happy with this, to be honest. Next up on the list is to render this wireframe. Rendering is not gonna be easy because the wireframe is in 3D and our screen is only 2D. So we need to use some sort of projection, something where you take a 3D object like our wireframe and project it onto a 2D screen. I'm gonna go research some different types of projection and I'll let you guys know which one looks the best for us. Alright, after glancing through this Wikipedia article on projection, I think the best candidate is something called a weak perspective projection. A perspective projection is basically how a camera sees. It gives you a sense of perspective, which at a very high level means that you can tell when objects are closer to you or further away from you based on where they are and how they're stretched. Alright, so given a 3D wireframe, how do we create a perspective projection? Well, first, remove all the lines. Let's just project the vertices first. We need to figure out where every vertex should be on the screen if it was being looked at by a camera in front of the screen, because that's what a perspective projection is trying to simulate. To do this, let's connect a line from the camera to every single vertex. If a line passes through the screen, or intersects it, that's where the vertex should be projected to on the screen, because that's kind of where the camera saw it at. And this is called raycasting, which is a major methodology behind a perspective projection. I definitely think we should use this for the Minecraft build. I mean, based on the pictures in the article, it seems like a pretty decent type of projection. But first, we need to know all the math behind it, so let's go figure that out. Let's say our screen is centered on the XY plane and the Z direction points into the screen towards the wireframe. Given a single 3D vertex defined by the location XYZ, we're trying to figure out its XY coordinate on the screen once it gets projected. And just to make it more clear, we'll call that coordinate on the screen X projected, Y projected. So how do we find an equation that takes us from XYZ to X projected, Y projected? Well, instead of trying to figure out the equation for X projected and Y projected at the same time, let's look at a top-down view of the projection and just focus on getting the equation for X projected. So we've got like a bird's eye view now. This line is our screen, this is our vertex behind the screen, and this is the camera. Since we're looking at it from above, we don't really care about Y anymore, because Y doesn't change. It's not noticeable in this type of view. You can just imagine for the time being that we're in a 2D coordinate system now, with just X and Z, and the origin still in the middle. Okay, so just like before, let's connect a line from the camera to the vertex. As you can see, it intersects the screen at a single point. Remember, our goal right now is to get X projected, or the X coordinate of that projected point. And so that's just this length right here. So to get that length, let's use some geometry to help us out. Let's draw two right triangles, one from the intersection point and one from the vertex. Now that we have these two triangles, let's label some stuff. This distance is X projected, which is what we're trying to solve for. This distance is the X coordinate of the vertex. This distance is the distance from the camera to the screen, which actually has a name. It's called the focal length. And finally, this distance is the sum of two things, the focal length and the Z coordinate of the vertex. Okay, so now we have four distances which correspond to the side lengths of these two triangles. And these two triangles are actually similar triangles, which means that one is just a scaled version of the other. What does that tell us? Well, that tells us that the ratio of their side lengths must be equal to each other. In other words, X projected over the vertex X is equal to focal length over focal length plus vertex Z. Those are literally just the two ratios of the side lengths of the triangles. Now to solve for X projected, it's pretty easy. We just multiply both sides by vertex X, and there we go. We have an equation for the projected X coordinate. What's even more beautiful is that in this type of projection, the top-down view is completely symmetric to the side view, which means that the equation for the Y coordinate is the exact same thing. Awesome! We now have the equations to go from an XYZ vertex to a projected XY point on the screen. You'll notice that we still have this variable focal length in the equations, and that's completely normal. That just means we get to choose how close the camera is to the screen when we project. Alright, so the last part of projection, which I kind of skipped over, is how do we project the lines? Well, the really cool thing is we don't have to. We can just project all the vertices and then use the edge table to draw the lines, because the edge table doesn't change after projection. Nice, that's really cool. So in summary, to project any 3D wireframe to a screen, we need to project every 3D vertex using the equations, and then just draw the lines using the edge table. That's it. That's all there is to projection. I still think this will work pretty well for Minecraft. But before we make it in Minecraft, let's code it up in Python just to be safe. Since the final goal is to make something animated, let's use a package called Pygame. Pygame is a library meant for game development, but it also makes it really easy to just draw some frames and play them in a window, which is really all I'm using it for. I'll be back when I got it done. Okay, the projection code is all set. So here's the vertex table and the edge table that describes a cube, and here's the projection function if you're curious. It takes a 3D vertex and uses the equations we just derived to return the projected coordinates. So now when we press run, a window pops up and there's our cube. Oh, and I also added a slider here for focal length so you can change it while it's running and see what it looks like with different focal lengths. It's kind of hard to imagine this being 3D right now, but you know what? Let me see if I can just show it at a different angle. One sec. Okay. There we go. I rotated it a little, and so that is, without a doubt, definitely our projected cube. Awesome, that looks really good. Alright, back in Minecraft, let's make a renderer. And when I say renderer, I just mean something that does the same thing as the projection function from Python. The input is XYZ, and the output is X projected, Y projected. I was gonna call it a projector, but I kept thinking of those things from school, so I'm just gonna call it a renderer instead. Before we actually build it, let's make a little colored diagram to see what it might look like. Alright, here's a diagram for the renderer. The input down here is X, Y, and Z, and we also have F, which stands for focal length, and then the output over here is X projected, Y projected. So the basic idea is we're going to multiply x and y by focal length with two multipliers in the front, and that gives us the numerators of the two equations. Then over here we'll add z plus focal length, and that gives us the denominator of the two equations. Once you have the two numerators and the shared denominator coming from over here, you can just use two dividers to perform that final division. And if we did everything right, then the result from those should be x projected, y projected. Alright, nice. I honestly really like this layout. Let's put this thing together. For the multiplier, I'm just going to use this 5 Hz multiplier that I already made from this video right here. And speaking of 5 Hz, I think it might be a good idea to try to make the entire renderer 5 Hz as well. Let me show you why. So this is the multiplier I was talking about, and 5 Hz means that the hardware can be pipelined at 5 calculations per second. In other words, I can feed it a stream of inputs at a speed of 5 per second, and sometime later we get a stream of outputs, also at 5 per second. It's kind of like when you're at a car wash. You don't have to wait until the person in front of you is done to go in. The car wash can work on multiple cars at the same time. The reason why this is a good idea for the renderer is because if the renderer is pipelined, we could feed the renderer a stream of vertices, and it would output a stream of all the projected vertices, which is much faster than doing them all one at a time. But anyways, let's yoink this multiplier and put it into position. There we go. Perfect. Next up, let's grab an adder for right here, where we're going to add z to the focal length. Luckily, I already have some adders in my schematics folder, so let me go grab one and I'll paste it in. And there we go. This is a 16-bit adder designed by Amino, and this adder is also 5 Hz pipelinable, just like the multiplier, so that's really cool. The last thing we need for this renderer is a divider, and well, I don't have a divider. I think I'm gonna have to make a 16-bit 5 Hz divider from scratch, because I highly doubt anyone's made one before. This is not gonna be fun. Don't ask how long this took. I'm not gonna answer. This is a gigantic 16-bit 5 Hz combinational divider. It takes over 200 redstone ticks from input to output, or 20 seconds, which is really gross. But I mean, you only have to suffer that delay once. After the 20 seconds are over, you're gonna get your stream of outputs just like the multiplier. Alright, let's put this big boy into place. Holy, this just got big. Dude, like, compared to the dividers, the multipliers are nothing. Maybe I should have just made a normal divider, which would have been way smaller and just not worry about pipelining. Nah, I already spent so much time on this, I'm gonna use it. I do not care. Alright, at this point, we have all the components we need for the renderer. All that's left to do is wire everything up. I'll see you guys when it's finished. Okay, everything wired up and should be ready to go. Let's test this thing out. I actually haven't tested it yet, so it's probably not gonna work first try. I'll just input the point 8, 16, 32, and let's put in a focal length of 64. So according to the equations, we should get 5 for x and 10 for y. And that's not even close. Oh, this is gonna be a pain to figure out what I did wrong here. Oh no. Well, I don't think I meant to make a floating repeater. Oh god, what is that? They're everywhere! Hold on, let me fix this. Alright, there were a lot of problems with the renderer, not gonna lie, but it's been about an hour. Hopefully it's fully working now. I just gave it a bunch of test cases and they all worked. So I would say the renderer is done. And at this point, we have everything we need to render the wireframe. We can't rotate it yet, but we can at least see what a single frame looks like. So let me go hook everything up and I'll be back when it's time to render our first frame. I'm so excited. Alright, everything is hooked up, and this is the button that does it all. When I press this button, it should render our first wireframe to the screen. You ready? Bop! That is not... That looks better, I think? Yeah, no, definitely. That looks right. Nice! Oh, that's beautiful. We just successfully rendered our first 3D wireframe. Let's go, dude. Let's summarize what we did so far. We started by defining a 3D wireframe as a vertex table and an edge table. We built a system for the user to input those two tables, all in binary. We derived the equations to render the wireframe based on a perspective projection. We simulated those equations in Python just to make sure they actually worked. Then we built a renderer which performs the equations in redstone. And finally, we hooked everything up, input a wireframe cube, and rendered it. Wow. We're making great progress. I mean, at this point, we can input any wireframe we want, press this button, and see what it looks like on the screen. Next, I want to try out some more wireframes other than just the cube, but let's be honest, manually entering binary on these levers sucks. So real quick, let's make another Python script to generate the binary for us. Specifically, let's make a script that takes in a vertex table and an edge table in Python, and produces a Minecraft schematic for us to paste into the world. The schematic will have redstone blocks in all the places that the binary is a 1, or, the places where you would otherwise need to flip a lever. This will make it much faster to create new wireframes and test them out. I'll see you guys when it's done. Alright, our schematic generator, or whatever you want to call it, is finished. I used a Python package called MC Schematic, made by my friend Sloime. MC Schematic lets you generate custom schematics super easily, and you can learn more about it in the description. It's a really powerful tool. But anyways, up here I quickly made a vertex table and an edge table for a pyramid, so let me run this code to generate it. And now we should have a schematic for the pyramid. There we go, nice. So now, instead of flipping levers, all we have to do is paste it right here. And just like that, the pyramid is inputted. We didn't even have to think about binary or flick any levers. That's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and render this. Ooh, nice. That looks pretty good. Not only did our script generate the right thing, but now I have way more confidence that the redstone actually works for all wireframes, not just the cube. Very nice. Alright, so before we get to the final part, which is rotating the wireframe, there's one more thing we have to do. Because right now, when you render a frame, you can see it drawing the lines. But the thing is, if we're going to use this for an animation, we don't really want to see it drawing the lines. Instead, it would be better to have a system where the screen waits until the frame is completely done being drawn and then refreshes the screen. I've heard some people call this a frame buffer before. I don't know if that's the correct term, but that's what I'll call it. So let's make a frame buffer. Alright, I've been playing around for a while. I think I have a good design. Let me show you how this works. What I have here is 2 sets of latches, and this is going to be attached to every single pixel. The first latch back here is where the frame actually gets drawn, but it's not connected to the screen yet. Once the whole frame is finished, you press this button, which transfers the data from the first latch to the second latch, and now it's on the screen. So I think this is perfect. I mean, it gives us the ability to wait until a frame is done and then push the frame. Let's hook this up and try it out. Okay, frame buffer has been added to the screen. So now let's render that pyramid again. And as you can see, the screen is blank. That's normal. The pyramid is being drawn, but you can't see it because it's still in the first set of latches. Now that it's ready, let's press this button, and the entire frame gets displayed at once. Nice! That was actually way simpler than I thought it was going to be. Okay, it's finally time for rotation. I'm really excited for this part, even though it might be kind of hard. If we want to rotate our wireframe, all we have to do is rotate all the vertices. Remember, edges are just relationships, which don't change during a rotation. Okay, but how do we actually rotate the vertices? Well, there's a concept in linear algebra known as matrix multiplication, which is perfect for what we're trying to do here. Let me explain. A matrix is a fancy sounding word, but it literally just means a bunch of numbers in a rectangle. You could have a 2x2 matrix or 3x5, whatever you want. It's just a grouping of numbers. So you can represent a 3D vertex as a matrix as well. It's just a 3x1 matrix where the x, y, and z coordinates make up one column of numbers. But why is this useful? Well, one thing you can do with certain matrices is multiply them together to get another matrix. Specifically, if you take the vertex vector and multiply it by something called a rotation matrix, the output is the rotated vertex in matrix form. Now, you also have to give it an angle so that it knows how much to rotate by, and typically that angle is represented by the symbol theta. If you're just seeing this for the first time, it can seem pretty weird. Like, how does one matrix multiplication just magically produce a rotated vertex? And I encourage you to watch 3 Blue 1 Brown series on linear algebra. It does a beautiful job of explaining matrix multiplication and so much more. The link is in the description. I'm not sponsored. I genuinely love his videos. But anyways, the basic idea is we're going to take all of our vertices and multiply them each by the same rotation matrix. Now, the other question we need to answer is what type of rotation do we actually want to do? Because that's going to change the rotation matrix. If we want to be able to rotate in any way around any axis, then the rotation matrix looks like this. That's really scary. I don't want to do that. Alright, so what if we just want to rotate around the x-axis only? In that case, this is the rotation matrix. Still kind of scary, but it's definitely a lot simpler. Another simple one is the rotation around the y-axis. And not surprisingly, the one for the z-axis isn't too bad either. I think it would be awesome if we could implement all 3 of these. Then we could let the user choose which of the 3 axes they want to rotate on, which would give them more freedom. But hold on, before we go set up all 3 of these matrices with redstone, I want to show you something that might save us a lot of work. Cause I don't know if you noticed this, but if you take out all the 0s and 1s from the 3 matrices and ignore the spaces, what you're left with is the same thing in all 3 cases. That's not a coincidence. This is actually the 2D rotation matrix, which you can use to rotate 2D points on a flat plane. Wait a minute, so a rotation around the X, Y, or Z axis is always just a 2D rotation in disguise? How is that even possible? Well, the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. For example, let's say you want to rotate around the X axis. Sure, if you want, you can just use the 3x3 version and it'll work just fine. But one thing you might notice is that X never changes from the initial vertex to the rotated vertex. So another way to do this is to simply ignore X and multiply the remaining part, YZ, by the 2D rotation matrix. Then just add X back in afterwards. And this trick does the exact same thing as using the original 3x3 matrix. Additionally, the y-axis and z-axis rotations also share the property that their respective letter does not change during a rotation. So we can use this trick for all 3 axes. This is huge. This means that if we want to rotate around the X, Y, or Z axis, we don't have to use 3 separate matrices. Instead, we can just ignore the letter that corresponds to the axis we want to rotate on, and then multiply by the same 2x2 matrix every single time. Pretty clever, right? I definitely think so. So, back in Minecraft, let's get to it. Okay, I've been building for quite a while, and this is the finished Vertex Rotator? Sure, let's call it that. This may look super complicated, but if you were following along with what I was explaining, well, this hardware just implements it. Here's where you input your vertex. Here's where you select the axis that you want to rotate on, either X, Y, or Z. And once those are inputted, this main part is where the matrix multiplication actually happens. These 4 big chunks are 4 multipliers that all work together to get it done. When they all finish, the rotated vertex gets output right here. Okay, so that's all great, but what is this giant thing over here? Well, I mentioned earlier that we also have to tell it how much we want to rotate by, right? We have to give this thing some angle, which I'll call theta, because the rotation matrix has sine of theta and cosine of theta inside of it. And that's what this giant thing is for. This entire thing is just a huge lookup table, or memory, that stores all the possible sine and cosine values for different values of theta. Which, by the way, I did not make by hand. I used MC Schematic again. So all the way over here is actually where you input theta. If you want to rotate by 3 degrees, you just type in a 3 right here. Once it gets inputted, it looks at this memory, it finds sine of theta and cosine of theta, and plugs them into the correct spots in this rotation matrix. And with that, I mean, yeah, without getting too detailed, that's really all there is to it. So now, with this machine, we can take any vertex, rotate it around the X, Y, or Z axis by any angle theta. That is really cool. At this point, everything we need is built. We have an entire rendering system, which already works, and now we have a Vertex Rotator that can rotate all the vertices. I am beyond excited to put these together and finally finish this thing. I'll see you guys in a bit. It's done! Let's go! This looks insane, dude. I think this might be the biggest project I've ever made. And by the way, if you're wondering how slow this is without any speedups, it's 700 redstone ticks per frame, which is a nice 0.01 frames per second. Good thing we have carpet mod. And with that, I think we're done. I'll see you in the showcase. enjoyed this video, subscribe. It's free and you can always change your mind later. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out, guys.